Hey Calvary kids, happy Wednesday. I hope that you guys are doing really well. Welcome to Wednesday Nights with Nick and Drew. And today is an extra special Wednesday because we are in the middle of something called Holy Week. And that is the week that leads up to Easter, starting from the Sunday before to the Sunday that is Easter Sunday. So today, myself and Drew are going to walk us through some of the most important parts of what is known as Holy Week, what makes it so special, and why we get to celebrate it. And that starts with this past Sunday being Palm Sunday. Now, why in the world would people name a Sunday after a type of branch on a tree or a leaf? That seems pretty weird, right? Well, it's because of the day that Jesus entered into the city of Jerusalem. They call it Palm Sunday because people were waving palm branches and they laid them on the ground in front of him as he walked into the city, and they shouted,
"Hosanna, glory to Jesus."
And they were proclaiming him as the king, and that is what we call Palm Sunday, which we just celebrated. So this is very important because as Jesus came to Jerusalem, it was his last week on earth. And you are going to find out from Drew what happens next.
Hey friends, Drew here. I get to talk about a really good part of Holy Week. After Jesus had the triumphal entry, he went to the temple. And what he did there was awesome. How many of you have ever seen Jesus angry? He did get angry on occasion, and this was one of them. When he went into the temple, he saw people buying and selling. Buying and selling ain't bad on its own, but the problem is people who came for Passover, a big Jewish holiday, from far away would often have to buy animals while they were in town. They can't bring them from home. So, in order to sacrifice to God, to worship him, they'd have to buy animals at the temple. Well, there were guys in the temple buying or selling animals for more than they had to in order to make lots of money off the people visiting from out of town. Well, Jesus saw that and he got
Furious.
He made a whip and he whipped them dudes out of the temple and said,
"Stop making this a den of thieves. We're supposed to be worshiping God."
I love that story. Jesus only got mad when people got between people wanting to worship God and God himself. That's what made Jesus mad.
So now, after Drew shared with us about when Jesus got
Really angry.
at the people in the temple, we move on to the later part of the week, which was probably Wednesday or Thursday, and a time where Jesus had a lot of interaction with the people that were in charge of the church during that day. And these people, the Bible calls them Pharisees or religious leaders or priests. And what was happening during this time is that when Jesus was in Jerusalem, all of these Pharisees and religious leaders were trying to get Jesus to say something so that they could arrest him. They were trying to trick him by sneaky questions they were asking or other things that they would try to make him do or say. But guess what? Jesus didn't fall for it even once. He said multiple times, and when the Bible records these conversations and these arguments almost, that Jesus called them hypocrites because they were saying one thing. They were the religious leaders, right? The people in charge of the church. But Jesus knew that their hearts were not with God. They were far away from him because they were trying to get Jesus arrested so that they could kill him, because they didn't want any of the trouble that he was causing with all of the people in Jerusalem. So that is Wednesday and Thursday of Holy Week, and Drew is going to take you to something that happens next.
All right, let's talk about the Last Supper. Toward the end of the week, Jesus and the disciples rented a room upstairs at a house, and they had what's called the Last Supper. The disciples didn't know how big a deal this was, but Jesus did. He knew, kids, that he was gonna have to die for the world. The disciples just thought they were celebrating a meal together before the holiday of Passover. Well, Jesus handed out bread and said,
Hey, this is like my body. Break it and eat it. I'm gonna be broken for you.
the disciples,
Okay, Jesus. This sounds important, but I don't know.
then he did something really big. He passed around a cup for them to drink from and said to them,
This is like my blood, shed for you. You're gonna be forgiven for your sins now.
see, back then, people just didn't get forgiven for nothing. Someone's gotta die for breaking God's law. Back then, people sacrificed animals. But Jesus said,
Nah, I'm gonna be the sacrifice now, so that we never have to sacrifice ever again. And you could be close to God.
that's why he gave him that cup and had him drink from it and said, This is my blood. It wasn't really his blood, but, it was a symbol. The disciples, they didn't understand everything, but Jesus did, and it was a big deal.
So after the Last Supper, Jesus and all the disciples, except for one, went to the Garden of Gethsemane. And at this garden, this is where Drew and I were last week on Wednesday. Jesus and all the disciples prayed. And Jesus was praying because he was so worried and he was so overwhelmed by what was happening that he needed to be with his Father. He needed to be with God. And he asked the disciples and even a few of them to pray with him, but they fell asleep. And then something crazy happened. Jesus got arrested. Can you believe that? Jesus got arrested by the people that were the religious leaders or the Pharisees that we talked about just a little bit ago. And when they arrested him, they took him to be condemned on trial and eventually to be crucified. So this is the end of Holy Week when Jesus was at the Garden of Gethsemane with his disciples. And he was praying for himself, but guess what, Calvary kids? He was also praying for you. Because as Jesus was so close with his Father, he prayed that you would have the same relationship with God. And you can find that in the book of John, chapter 17. Ask your parents to go and help you read that. And you can see that Jesus prayed for all the people that would come after his disciples. Pretty cool stuff. So that wraps up Holy Week, as Drew and I just told you from this Wednesday. But guess what? We have a bunch of really, really cool stuff coming for you on this Friday, which is Good Friday, and then Saturday and Easter Sunday. So make sure you stay tuned to Calvary Kids Online all weekend long. Keep up with us on Instagram and Facebook, and we will see you guys soon.